So my name is Carlos. I'm the Chief Content Director at Change Lawyers. And a big hello and welcome to everyone. Change Lawyers is a legal foundation, and our goal is to fund the next generation of change makers. But before we begin, I really do want to send my love out to all my fellow Californians and anyone else affected by the West Coast fires. 2020 has been more than overwhelming. In fact, I personally feel overwhelmed constantly, um, going from COVID to police aggression and racism. I very often find myself feeling very burned out and sort of feeling the weight of the stress on my shoulders. And yet, I remain grateful, grateful because of everyone in this room, and grateful that we can create spaces like this so that we can learn how to better take care of ourselves. So with this in mind, I do want to set a tone for the next hour. Um, a lot of us are lawyers, work in very white collar professional settings. This is not that space. In this space, we value honesty, vulnerability, and emotions. And above all else, we value your identities. So as we embark on this workshop together, I invite all of you to share as much as you're comfortable in the chat box and in the Q&A box. Get to know each other, find your people. And at the very end, we're gonna leave time for our presenter, Prentis, to answer as many of your questions as possible. And I also want to just remind folks that just like every Change Lawyers event, the discussion that we are about to embark will center the voices and experiences of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It will center the voices of trans and non-binary folks, and it will center the voices of queer folks and femme folks. So keep that in mind as you interact with each other in the chat box and ask your questions and provide your comments. So with that in mind, let's get started. I want to welcome Prentis Hemphill, and let me just tell you a little bit about them. Prentis is a movement facilitator, somatics teacher, and practitioner, and they work at the convergence of healing, collective transformation, and political organizing. They have spent 15 years bridging well-being and power building as part of a movement building organizations, most recently as a healing justice director at Black Lives Matter Global Network. In 2016, Prentis was awarded the Buddhist Peace Fellowship Soma Award for community work inspired by Buddhist thought. And at this present moment, Prentis is the co-founder of Resilience Strategies, a project intended to deepen movement practices and understanding of politicized healing. Prentis is also a teacher of somatics, so that's today, with generative somatics and with Black organizing for leadership and dignity. So with that, I want to turn it over to Prentis. So welcome, Prentis.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for inviting me into your space. I feel really grateful to be sharing this space and this time with you all, even though we can't see one another, or you can see me, I can't see you. We can kind of perceive that there's a gathering of people who are here to understand ourselves more deeply and how understanding ourselves relates to the work that we're committed to in the world. So it feels always heartening for me to be in those kinds of spaces where we're all kind of grappling and learning and trying things out. So thank you for that invitation. And want to echo what Carlos shared around folks who are in California. I just earlier saw a friend kind of show me what it looked like outside the window, and I'm really thinking about you all today, and I know it's kind of gotten more intense today. So I'm holding that in addition to all the other things folks are holding here on this call and bringing here. So thank you. I am a somatics teacher. I'm going to explain what somatics is. So if you're like, I have no idea what that word even means, we're going to get into it a lot over the course of this next time together. And I'll also talk about kind of what it means to be centering our bodies and our experiences, even inside of this political moment, um, is. So I'll talk about that here too. Um, First, I wish I could like get a poll from you all about how many people have heard of the word somatics, but I will trust that a good number haven't. I saw Carlos, you said you weren't familiar with what it meant. I'm gonna explain it, and I'm gonna ask as I explain it, and I'll probably check in a few times as we go. But I'm gonna ask as I explain it for you to listen if you can, or if you are practiced in, listen not only with your kind of thinking intellectual self, but listen in how the words kind of land on your own body, how they feel to you, what they ignite, where you feel kind of curious or where you might feel nervous. We want to listen with that level of attention too to how our bodies are responding. So somatics as a um, discipline or as a practice is, I'll break down the word first. So soma in Greek means body. It actually means the body in its wholeness. So what that means is that we have our physical body, the kind of flesh and tissues and muscles and all of that, bones, that body. But each of us is also, we're our physical body, we are the bodies of our imagination, we are the bodies of our thinking, our minds have a certain shape to them. I'll talk about this a little bit more. But the body in its wholeness is a body, not only the physical aspect, but all the ways that the body interacts with the world, all the things that the body does. It also includes that. So sometimes in English, we talk about the body and it kind of gets flattened to mostly mean the kind of flesh. But when I talk about somatics, I mean the wholeness of what the body is and does. Somatics then is about the body in its wholeness, and it's also about how the body can change, transform. So I don't know if any of you have ever had New Year's resolutions or anything like that, where you're like, I'm not going to look at my phone before 8 a.m. or something like that. Um, I'm going to stop doing that on January 2nd or January 1st, right? And by February 1st, or maybe by January 15th, you're doing the same thing you were before. Nothing has really changed. And you had that experience. I know I have had that experience. I've had friends that have said, I am um, not going to date people that act like this, and then find themselves dating people that are the same. Or you as a friend are like, that person is oddly familiar in how they act. So we do those things. We have good ideas. Our mind will have an insight or an idea, but our bodies are still conditioned to or used to acting and behaving in different ways. So when we talk about what change means, change is not just having an insight and trying out something new, but to really change deeply on a fundamental level has to include the body. It has to actually, the change has to originate through the body and through the feeling self, through the stories that live inside of you. So somatic says you can't change with just the mind. You have to change through the whole being. And that's how transformation and real change can happen. So somatics in a practical sense is that theory. It's a theory that the body is actually really important. It's not just mind over matter, that the body has to actually be the full body. Our body in our wholeness has to be the place from which transformation happens. Um, it also is practices. So I teach folks to do practices. So our bodies, if you'll just think about this, each of you, me, you're looking at me right now, right? And you're noticing the way my hands move, the way my eyes move. You're creating some perceptions about that. But each of us has a range. So there's a range that my hands typically move. There's a range that your hands typically move. some of that is the structure of our bodies. Some is each hold about who we are, about what's a safe range of movement, or what's a safe volume of my voice, or what's a safe way that my eyes can move around in the room. We have a range, and sometimes want we want to have experiences that our ranges don't allow for. So, for example, when I started doing somatics work, I would say, I really want to feel connected to people. I really want to feel connectable. I want to feel connected to. I want to be vulnerable. And yet, when I would come into social situations, I would pull back just slightly, but I would pull myself back until someone would interact with me and probably would get the indication that I wasn't actually wanting to connect. But really, I wanted to connect so badly, but I was afraid of not belonging. But my soma, my body, was actually communicating a different thing. And from this place, I had a really hard time showing myself. I had a really hard time revealing my interest. So the body holds stories and it tells stories. So we practice things in somatics that actually have us kind of disrupt our what we're comfortable in and do different kinds of practices. We're going to get into a very basic one here in just a bit, but I wanted to just give you that sense that somatics is both a theory and it's also a set of practices. Um, just want just to pause because I always like to move at the rate of embodiment. Just pause and notice for yourself, and you may even drop something in the chat box. But where are you feeling activated? And it doesn't have to be positive or negative, but what about what I've shared so far is kind of activating you, sparking curiosity? Maybe there's parts that you feel rejecting of, but just let yourself notice what's there and then notice how you know. What I mean by that is if you feel curious, how do you know you feel curious? What does curious feel like inside of you? Yeah, these are great. Yeah, just notice. Yeah, yeah. Some correlation here between a relaxed body and curiosity. Also, there's some kind of energy, excitement, also anxiety, also stress that's present. And even with the stress, how do you know you're stressed? What's happening in your body to indicate that you're stressed? Yeah, an openness in the body. Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. These are great noticings for folks. Your body has a whole set of ways that it expresses emotions. And when we start building relationship with ourself, we start noticing the constellation of tensions, relaxations, all of these things that happen in our bodies. And it's a way for us to really start to know ourselves and our own reactivity to content. So that's great. I'm going to ask you to keep kind of swimming in those waters. I want to just share here that there's a lot of very real reasons why we don't actually really learn and listen to the language of our bodies. And I think I mentioned earlier at the top of the call that there's this mind over matter concept that we kind of live in. And this kind of comes from a Cartesian philosophy, uh, Descartes, and his kind of frame around I think, therefore I am. These kinds of philosophies then go on to structure how we build and shape our lives. And a lot of Western thought, Western practice kind of operates from this idea of I think, therefore I am, which means the mind and the brain are greater than, in some ways, the body, that they lead the body. And so we start becoming these brains that are carried around by flesh. So what this what this does is that it actually has us kind of collectively as a society and as a value that a society holds, we start to numb out or turn down our awareness of our own sensations in our bodies. That actually the most important thing is what my chest muscles are doing in response to this question, not the way my stomach is responding. What I think is more important than all of that. And that's kind of a value that is implicit and embedded in so much of Western culture. Now, what one of the things that this does over time, one of the things this does in a relationship generally, is that it has us be in a relationship of domination over our bodies. So even when our bodies want to rest, our mind will often, and we will allow our minds to dominate what our bodies are asking for or need. And this kind of way of relating to organicness or the world or nature around us translates from our own bodies to our relationships across the board with nature, with young people, all of these things. What we think and the logic of this, it trumps the body, it trumps the flesh. This can really lead to burnout. And I've worked with a lot of people over time who, because they spend years thinking I should be able to do something and forcing their bodies to do those things and ignoring, and not in a malicious way, both ignoring but also not knowing how to read the signs and messages of the body. And eventually your energy will deplete. And as you're working over your limit, over your energy limit, your body will draw energy from somewhere. It'll draw it from your organs. And this is the way, when cortisol is running through our bodies in high stress, if we are in high stress situations continuously, that will drain on our organs and eventually to heart failure and a number of other things. That while we have energy, it has to be renewed. And if our mind is the only place from which we're drawing useful information about what we should do, you will, without a doubt, burn yourself out because it's not in relationship to the actual capacity of your body. So when we understand the language of the body, which to me is sensations are the language of the body. When we understand the language of the body, we begin to do better at making decisions about our capacity. But first, we have to kind of understand the language of the body. And lastly, when we start to, I'll put it like this, in recent years, kind of neuroscience, maybe some of you have heard of the vagus nerve, maybe some of you have also heard that our hearts and our guts have as many neurons as our brains. What that means is that information is being processed, received, reacted to below your mind and your brain. In other aspects of your body, information is being processed, decisions are being made. That information is traveling up from the body, up through the vagus nerve in an upward motion until it gets to the head and the decisions get made. So we are always processing information through our bodies. We're just ignoring it a lot of the time. And when we do that, we limit how depthful our experiences of connection can be, of authenticity, of joy. There's a limit to those things when we're not including the whole system in our experiences. So that's really another reason why I do this work, because I actually feel like the more we integrate our knowing, the more we listen at the rate of and at the sight of our full selves and our bodies, the more we are able to experience the vibrancy of this life, of these lives that we are in, and the less it's limited by our kind of control and domination over ourselves. So the last thing I want to share here around this piece before I kind of get into the practice, and I'm sorry that I haven't been able to see all the things in the chat. The last thing I want to talk about is stress in particular, because I know that that's something that's really, given the work that you all are doing and holding, stress tends to be a really kind of pervasive issue. So how do I manage stress, or how do I be with stress? Um, Stress is one way that I think about stress is that it's an indicator that the body is perceiving that the challenges it's facing, it doesn't have the resources to address fully. And resources could be energy, it could be um, um, other folks in collaboration with you, but whatever the thing is that it's facing, it's not sure that it has the resources actually to address those issues. Um, and yes, I was going to address good stress and bad stress, quote unquote. Um, what it, how do I say this? Stress, or what I call good stress, and people talk about good stress, bad stress, I call it pressure. That pressure actually makes it possible to grow. We can't grow and develop without pressure. You think about a plant kind of blooming or budding, that there's actually a point at which it really wants to break out of its casing. And to do that, pressure is created inside of the kind of seed casing. And pressure creates until it pops open and there's a plant there. So that casing, while in the beginning it was actually a, a container of resources and safety and protection, at some point for the plant becomes a barrier. And that stress that the plant has to kind of push up against creates the opportunity for it really to grow and develop. So we need some level of pressure. We need some level of pressure. But stress becomes problematic in two ways. Maybe this is kind of one way. It's that I mentioned earlier that what stress is in our bodies is our bodies are not sure that we can actually, that we have the resources to address whatever the issue is. So I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but trauma is really my specialty and where I do a lot of work. That is where your system actually gets overwhelmed. You don't have the resources to kind of make it through a life or death situation. So you can kind of think of trauma as the extreme end of that, where you are actually overwhelmed by what has happened. And that creates a whole series of other challenges that then have to be healed and addressed. Stress, you're not quite to a traumatic level, but you are stressing the body out, and the body is not sure. It's trying to assemble its resources to see if I can actually address this. So stress can be great for us. It can be that pressure that actually helps us to grow. The challenge is that, one, if we don't know how to assemble the resources we need to address the challenge, but two, if we remain in stress over periods of time, much like traumatic incidents, our body gets overwhelmed hormonally, in our own tissues and muscles, and we end up depleting our systems over time. So if people are like, oh, I'm always stressed out, I'm stressed, I'm stressed, I'm stressed. If you aren't actually operating in a rhythm of like, oh, there was pressure and I assembled the resources and I got through to the next side of growth, now I'm going to come down into a kind of valley of rest or recovery. If you're not doing that and you're just stress, or even just constant kind of stress, your hormones are going to constantly, cortisol is going to constantly be running through your body. Your body's never going to have the time for the parasympathetic nervous system responses to come on and actually kind of put you back together, calm you down, tell you everything's okay. And you're going to deplete and run out. to that point, I just want to say the more we can think about our bodies, when I talked about the domination piece in the beginning, um, it's the same thing that we do to our kind of natural systems, to the earth. It's always about increasing the curve. What can I get, extract, extract, extract. We do the same things to our bodies. It's the same logic that we apply to our bodies, or we applied it to our bodies first. We have to, I think, begin to think about our bodies, but also the earth that we live on, as um, a resource that we renew. That there's actually a rhythm. Your whole body is an ecosystem. It's a system. It has many systems, and if we're not actually calculating the way that we renew and restore, and then we're doing the same thing to our bodies that we're doing to other systems that will eventually have catastrophic effects. So stress in and of itself can be okay, but what is your plan or practice around rest and recovery that allows you to occasionally amp up, but then always come down so that you can generate the kind of energy source that will support you? Some of us get fueled by coffee and or other things that bring us up because we're actually depleted. We need those things, especially when we're actually depleted. We need to kind of generate energy some kind of way. And then we have a hard time coming back down because we actually don't know how to rest and recover. So we might drink alcohol or, and again, I have a glass of wine. I'm not kind of trying to pathologize our coping, but sometimes we start to use these things to actually mimic a rhythm of uh, exertion and recovery that we're not actually able to do on a on the level of our body and our sensations. So oftentimes we will unconsciously be medicating what is a rhythm that's actually not able to express itself through our bodies. Um, so to move us into practice, what I want to share here is that um, one of the first things we teach people in somatics is how to let the body, in some ways, relax. It's a dynamic relaxation. We want to be present and relaxed. We want to be able to act and relax. But we also want to know what relaxation can feel like in our bodies so that we know how to get there again. If it's not something that we really know how to do, it doesn't matter what practices you do if you don't actually know what rest feels like. You can do yoga and bring overextension or stress to the practice and still not get as much of the rest and recovery. I mean, you can do this practice, centering, and bring an energy of um, a kind of refusal to relax or not knowing how to actually relax our muscles. Um, that then won't allow you the rest and recovery. So it's find the practice that works for you. But the point is to get to a body where that get to a place where the actual muscles and tissues of your body can begin to let go. I do body work with people. I work with clients. Well, when we could be in proximity to one another, I'd work with clients who sometimes would hold a contraction in their body for decades. And some of that was around trauma or fear, anxiety, but they might hold a contraction, say, in their chest for 10 years and not even be able to feel it. It's gotten so automated that it's no longer conscious. So, this is uh, hopefully an opportunity for you to get more familiar with your own system and your own body to see, oh, where might I be holding? Where might I be tense? Where might I be so slack I can't feel anything? And we want to start to bring sensation back on for those areas of your body. Um, all right. So we're going to do this practice together called centering. You can stand up or you can be seated. I'm going to stand up just because I have not activated my lower body in a couple hours here. So I want to bring that on. So find for yourself a position, seated, standing, lying down, whatever works for your body, where you're able to be present and also comfortable. But we want you to be alert. So we're not going into a position that's going to knock us out and go to sleep. We want to be alert. So I think because you're lawyers, I'm teasing, but not teasing. I'm going to actually guide us through a quick breath practice just to keep our breath dropping in and down, and then we'll move into the centering practice. Some of you may have done this before, but I want you to take an inhale, hold for a second at the top, release, exhale, your mouth, hold it at the bottom. Inhale, hold at the top. Exhale. Hold at the bottom. One more on your pace. Good, and just keep breathing and allowing the breath to deepen as you go. Just start with that practice because sometimes it can help land us in our bodies. And I want you, before we kind of get into the whole centering practice, I want you to just scan your body for a second. And instead of trying to, like I said, control your body, make your body do something, be curious about how your body is. You can start at the level of your mood. Like, what kind of mood am I in? Or moods. And let yourself accept it. You don't have to fight with yourself if the mood comes up. I'm in a funky mood. Let yourself be in a funky mood. It's okay. And then let that draw you into some curiosity about what's actually happening inside of you. So scan for places of tension. Scan for places of movement. Good. Scan for temperature. If you notice any differences in temperature across your body, my fingertips are cold, but my thighs are really warm. Just notice that. And then we also want to notice that there's places where there's actually no sensation that you can detect. Maybe the places feel heavy, maybe they just feel absent. Good, and whatever's there, allow it. We're starting to reinstate a sense of trust with your body. Your body can tell you how you are, and you can be with that. Good. I'll tell you, the more you do somatics work, the more kind of minute sensations you start to be able to hold and pay attention to. So we just want to invite whatever feeling is there. And we're going to do this practice of centering intentionally. So I'm going to ask you to keep bringing that breath down and into your center. A lot of different cultures have a lot of different words for this place. You can even tap it if you want to, get familiar with it. And it goes all the way around. It's your pelvic bowl. There's a correlation to your center of gravity, which I could nerd about for another hour, but we're not going to do that. Just drop into that center place. See what it's like to breathe from there. And then we're just going to play with some dimensions. And the first one is length. So from your body, just check out, where could I add length, or where might I be kind of overextending in my length? So back of the neck is often a place to look for. Down along the spine, the pelvis, kind of tilts we tend to have of the pelvis. See if you can find yourself right on top of your pelvis as much as possible. And then down through your legs. Feeling the length also of your arms. So sometimes we can get in a contraction of kind of hiding ourselves or pulling ourselves in or down. Sometimes we can be in a contraction of taking up, overextending. All of these things are about kind of mitigating belonging and connection. So how can you find your body's length? And then in the lineage I studied, this is one of the ways that we express dignity, or can be. We really express dignity in all ways, but this is one way we can look for dignity in each other. See if you can offer dignity to yourself, something inherent in you, a worth that can't be compromised or negotiated. You get to be solidly here. And you also get to inspire or offer dignity to other people. A generous dignity, not a scarcity dignity. Good, and we'll hold on to that and then feel ourselves side to side. Maybe feeling the width of your head, ear to ear, letting your jaws go if there's any tension holding there. Feeling your throat, your chest. Really bringing breath to those muscles from the shoulder to the chest. Let breath expand and relax them. Same in our torsos. Across our pelvis. Hips, feel the width of your legs. And just notice what it feels like to kind of long for connection. See if you're feeling your width, you can also let yourself be more connectable or accessible. What could you make vulnerable right now? And how does that shift your muscles, your body? And then consider here your boundaries too. How do you breathe or hold yourself so that you get to let yourself out, but you also get to remain intact? You get to take up the space that's yours. And we're going to center in depth here. So it's often a dimension we don't think about. Back to front, front to back. Really feel what's behind you. We all have ancestors we come from. We all have traditions or culture that we come from. And let that be behind you, especially those in your lineage that you feel aligned with. Let them be behind you and let that actually soften your back. Let it soften the backs of your legs or your butt. Good. And then feeling in and through your body right now. Notice something happening in real time because so much is happening in your body: heartbeat, digestion, potentially. And then feel for your front self. Front of your body, the clothes on your body, your eyelashes, your nose, your toes, your knees. And really let yourself kind of be here in this moment. Oftentimes we're in 10 other moments, or we think we are. But how could you organize yourself to be here? And also in that, organizing yourself to be kind of a point in that lineage, showing up with relaxation, presence. And then lastly, we're gonna center, we call it our commitment, but what is it that you care most about? Could be what you're called to do. It could just be something you care about in your own process right now. All of that's fine. But what do you care about? What do you care about doing, making happen, being? Tell yourself. And then let that fill you up. And we can just practice it, but our bodies are often full of stories that don't belong to us and aren't the stories of the things that we care about. We're shaped by the world. So, what is it that you care about? And can you shape yourself from the inside out to be an expression of that? To often say, if you care about that, how much connection do you need in your body? If you care about that, how much dignity is required? If you care about that, what's your relationship to time and your lineage and your presence now? Good, and risk just a little bit more, letting it be a little bit more seen in your body. Good, and we're going to transition here in a minute, but I want you to just notice what mudra now. Whatever that is, just hold that. It gets to be true. Sometimes there are things that need more space to be expressed. Sometimes we feel a relief. Whatever it is, it all gets to be here. But just let yourself acknowledge how you actually are with more space. Good, and we'll come back. I think we are moving towards Q&A, so we can bring that quality of presence, whatever got kicked up for you, to the next 15 minutes of our time together. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Prentis. I was doing it along with you, and I just started off. So, folks, please drop in your questions into the chat box and the Q&A box. I have a couple of lined up, but I think we have time for a few more. So, if you have questions specifically about what you're going through, feel free to share that with us. The first question I have is: you mentioned earlier on in your presentation, before you went into the practice, about the difference between good slash normal stress and bad stress. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that and what that looks like?
Yeah. Let's see, what did I not say in that part before? I think the most useful thing probably for this group to really take away from that conversation is what is the rhythm of your life? What's the rhythm of it? And do a real honest assessment of the rhythm. I often say that, you know, all the decolonizing work that we all do, all the healing work that we all do, all of it is about rhythm. And it makes sense to me the way that like dance or drumming or all these things get relegated to the side. And the most important thing is what we produce inside of this culture. But rhythm is really one of the ways we stay, things are allowed to move through our muscles and our bodies. Um, Rhythm is kind of how we operate. I'm not a super woo woo person, and no, I'm not knocking anybody who's woo woo. I am a healing practitioner, but vibrations are actually the essence of how life moves around and how life gets created. So we have to engage in rhythm and understanding that our bodies operate in rhythmic cycles. Um, uh, and of night day cycles, 24-hour cycles, but there are also these other cycles that move throughout our days. It's important for us to understand our bodies, not again as a kind of thing to extract work from, but a kind of ecosystem to tend to. So stress becomes extra toxic when it is not rhythmic, and when we are in kind of a constant state, a chronic state of stress, maybe we're stressed at work, then we go home and we're still thinking about that, or we're stressed at home, or we're always at home now with our kids and everybody else at the house, and the stress level is just maintained, and we also don't have strategies, or we don't prioritize ways of moving in rhythm of rest and recovery. And sometimes we're like, oh, I'm resting, I'm lying on the phone, I'm lying on the bed looking at my phone, looking at Instagram or something, which actually doesn't allow the parasympathetic response to come on. Doing nothing, letting the body kind of swirl in that kind of subterranean space where we have ideas, or we're kind of moving in and out of dream. That's a essential process of recovery for the body. So stress, I think for you all, there's a lot more that can be said, but it's especially damaging when it's not in relationship to a just as diligent practice of rest and recovery. We have to bring the kind of attention to our resilience, to our rest and recovery, as we do to the things that cause us stress too. We're not going to do away with stress. There's a lot to do, but we can be in a more renewing rhythm with the stress that we're dealing with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because for a lot of us, we can't completely avoid stress. I know that there's a lot of folks on the call who are, like public interest attorneys with clients who are immigrants, undocumented, incarcerated. And so that work is important, right? But so they can't like completely avoid stress. So from what it sounds like, it's not really about avoiding stress, sort of
Yeah.
about balancing it out with sort of like moments of doing nothing and letting your body feel.
Yes, yes. And not trying to do those things at the same time, because sometimes it can be like, oh, this is a peaceful way. It's if you're going to work, work. If you're going to rest, rest. And let those things be separate.
Got it. We have another question from Julia Wilson. Hi, Julia. Julia was actually our coach for our Public Speaking 101 webinar a few months ago. And Julia wants to know how we can learn more about somatics practices. Are there teachers or communities, maybe here locally in California, that you would recommend?
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, somatics has it's a wide canon of thought and work, and there are teachers like Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk. Peter Levine does somatic experiencing. I studied under generative somatics, which does politicized somatics. I studied there for 10 years. Um, and I taught there. Uh, it's a politicized and also collective understanding of somatics. So it's not just the individual body, it's also the collective bodies that we're in. It's also the cultural bodies that we're in. So generative somatics has been a place of study that is based in California, though I don't know if they're doing programming at the moment. Um, I'm starting a project called the Embodiment Institute that will be launching at the end of this year, but is trying to offer some trainings in the space that we're in to just kind of bring in practices so people can kind of take those back to where they are and to their families, to their communities, to their organizations, but to offer some practices around embodiment. So that is one thing. There was a great book that came out a couple years ago by Resma Menachem called My Grandmother's Hands. That is a great somatics book, especially for folks of color and especially for Black folks, because it talks about the trauma on the Black body. It also talks about white body supremacy in that book, and it's a great introduction to politicized somatics. And yeah, I think those are great places to start.
Thank you. And folks, for all of you, we'll be doing a follow-up email with the recording and some resources. So if you didn't catch all that, don't worry. I'll follow up with Prentis later and get a couple of names and book titles. A couple of people are asking a variation of the same question, which is like in the practice you just led us through, there were a lot of like uncomfortable feelings coming up for folks, sadness, for instance. How do you, like, what are your thoughts about dealing with those feelings, those emotions as they come up? And is a hope that over time, as you practice somatics daily, these feelings will go away?
Yeah. That's a great question because for many of us, the reason why we don't do healing work or we don't feel is because there are feelings there that are uncomfortable for us, or that we are afraid will overwhelm us if we feel them, or there are memories that are lurking. It's often what we're holding in the contractions in our bodies, all those stories and those feelings. I mentioned earlier, sometimes I work with clients that have been holding a memory or a feeling they were afraid to feel for half their lives. And I can understand the fear of that. Part of what I'm trying to show is possible is that we can heal, but healing does require feeling. And it requires feeling things that we've been avoiding. And we won't feel those things forever. Those are all the things I can guarantee. Some of those things will feel hard and you won't feel them forever. And that's why it's helpful to work with a practitioner or a guide or somebody that can be with you and accompany you through those hard feelings. But we have to feel what's hard in order to transform. But we want to do it in a way that feels safe for us. We want to do it in a way that makes it feel possible. So it makes sense for so many of us that sadness would be there. It's waiting for us to pay attention to it. It's waiting to tell us what we're sad about. It's waiting to give us information about what needs to shift in our lives. And often our busyness or whatever it is that we do is a way of not listening to what that emotion is trying to tell us. Now, the emotion may show up, we may be like, oh, that's actually not what I want to do. But an emotion it wants to reveal itself, and it's not just going to vanish. It's going to live there until we actually pay attention to it. So yes, with practice, it becomes less scary to feel, but we also create these bodies in the sense that I was talking about before that can hold more and more complexity of emotion without getting overwhelmed. And we do that through somatic practice, through feeling.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Anna Hohagen. Hi, Anna, nice to see you. Anna's actually one of Change Lawyers fellows from a few years ago working on Indigenous rights in rural California. And Anna wants to ask you to see if you have any advice on how to combat negative self-talk, for instance, like, do you replace negative self-talk with positive self-talk? Is that a good strategy for overcoming it?
The short, quick answer, actually, I have a podcast called Finding Our Way, and we just recorded an episode yesterday where I kind of talk about some of this. But negative self-talk is often a result of shame, or what we might call toxic shame. And that is often some variation of that gets embedded in us when we're very young, and not always, but it's when we are a child, or when we are young, or anywhere in our kind of development, um, when we don't feel like we can understand the context of why something is happening, we can start to, how do I say it? A child, for example, only has so many ways of making sense of the bad things that are happening, or the feelings that are happening around them. Often what a child can do is internalize things. And often that lives and persists in the body as shame. And shame can be a very how do I say it? It can take on a lot of different voices, it can say a lot of different things. It's a very creative mechanism inside of us. And we have to heal the shame. We have to go to the root and the origin of our shame to understand how to address what created that rupture, and what it's keeping us from doing right now. So it's a whole longer piece around how we heal shame in the body. Positive self-talk can work to some degree, but I think the larger work is kind of excavating what sits underneath the shame, because often underneath the shame is helplessness, or fear of not belonging, or fear of expulsion, or danger, real traumatic um, incidents of danger. So we really want to get to what's the root, because the shame's going to keep feeling justified to protect you if we don't go into the root of why it exists in the first place. Sorry, I wish I had a clearer answer there, but that's kind of how it works. I hope that's helpful.
No, I think just based on some of the comments and like me nodding along, I definitely can feel that. I think for a lot of first gen folks and people of color, shame is something that we sort of like
Yes.
have a visceral understanding of. So we are out of time, but I would just want to thank Prentis, and I want to thank everyone in the room for creating such a great space with us. Prentis, is there anything you want to leave folks with?
Just that I feel so grateful for the work you all are holding. I have lately been just like sitting with, there's so much for us to heal from. There's so much for us to heal in the present moment. And it is absolutely possible. I think the more specific we can get about it, the more we can recognize and value our feelings, the more possible it's going to be for us to heal. And it's so necessary. When all of us heal, the entire world changes. Like, it completely changes. So that.
Thank you. And with that, I just want to tell folks that in a few days you will be receiving some more resources, including some of the items that Prentis mentioned. We'll get you a link to the podcast. We'll get you a link to a couple of books and resources, as well as a recording. And I also want to make a plug for Change Lawyers. Every year we give out scholarships to the next generation of students. Almost all of them are people of color and first-gen folks. We're going to be doing that again this year on October 21st. So keep an eye out for that. We're planning something really great. Even though it'll be virtual, we're trying to make the most of it. And we think it's going to be a really great centering moment for all of us to continue to do what we just did in this hour. So with that in mind, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Prentis. And have a great rest of your day. Please stay safe out there if you are here on the West Coast.
Thanks, y'all.